time, I think, to dip our toes in the waters of international affairs and geopolitics. We covered the story earlier of Sir Keir Starmer's new National Security Advisor, Jonathan Powell, facing demands to disown his wife, for want of a better phrase, because she has, in times past, made some rather fruity comments on X, which seems to suggest her sympathies do not lie with Israel. We're going to be talking about that. But first, let's talk about what's going on when it comes to Israel, because apparently Hamas has said it's ready to secure a Gaza ceasefire deal immediately, but claims it's not had any serious proposals from Israel in months. An official for the group has told Sky News, great to know that Sky News on the blower to Hamas there. Let's speak now to Colonel Simon Diggins, military and defence analyst and former defence attaché in Kabul. Simon, last thing I heard, I got the impression that everyone's getting a little bit fed up with Hamas, actually, including Qatar for a long time. It's been the host of the headquarters of the Hamas political leadership, some say that America asked them to do that so they could keep eyes on. But they seem to be saying, we don't want to be part of negotiations anymore. They're not going anywhere. And what's more, we might boot Hamas out of the country. And yet here comes Hamas's response saying, oh, yeah, we'd have a ceasefire immediately. But Israel's being the unreasonable ones. They've not put forward any serious proposals in months. Now, I know which side of the argument I feel inclined to fall down on, but where is the reality in this situation?
I think the reality is that both sides are still fairly intransigent about what they're trying to do, and we have a set of objectives which are effectively mutually exclusive. From Israel's perspective, their defence, which is absolutely legitimate, but there's also in the back and recovering their hostages who are still being held after all this time. But there's also conversations that run around in the background there about what the long-term future would be, including the viability, if possible, of some kind of one-state solution. And where Hamas does or may or may not fit into that is clearly, as far as Israel is concerned, unacceptable. But then what is acceptable? And from the Hamas perspective, I mean, they talk good talk about a ceasefire, but their conditions include a permanent withdrawal of Israeli forces from Gaza to go with a ceasefire. Those two things are not anywhere close. There are some intermediate positions around releasing hostages, about prisoners, about humanitarian aid. All those sort of things are probably negotiable. But the kind of fundamentals about whether there's the basis for a permanent ceasefire, which I think everyone would like to see in some form or other, I think are still a long way away from each other.
And going back to Qatar's role in all of this, I was speaking to someone the other day who said, well, actually, it's quite interesting. If Qatar kick out what remains of the Hamas leadership from Doha, it's far more likely that these guys will have cross marks on their heads, targets, that they are not going to be protected. Do you think that that is essentially Qatar working in America's interests, in Israel's interests, to essentially try and scare what remains of the Hamas leadership by saying no more safe protection for you? You better start, pulling your finger out and working on a serious negotiation, or otherwise, essentially, you're going to find a little red dot in the middle of your eyes during the night time.
Yeah, I mean, that is a possibility. I mean, I think the role of Qatar is interesting, but you can look at the geography of Qatar and where it actually sits. It sits on the edge of the Arabian Peninsula, and it sits just a couple of hundred kilometres away from Iran. With a not insignificant Shia population, it's close, and the whole of that eastern seaboard is basically Iran. So they're always going to have a slightly ambiguous position for that. They also host significant Western military bases, and so they find themselves really as a country sitting between them. I mean, their sympathies in many respects are towards Western interests, and in terms of their economy and everything that goes with that. But geography is also important to them. So they look for ways in which they can create some peace and some stability across the entire region in an area which, to use the Israeli phrase, is a very rough neighbourhood. And I think that's where the Qataris come to from there. And they may well have got sick and tired of Hamas's political wing not really advancing any kind of sensible, coherent solutions that might go forward as well. But I think in broad terms, that's where the Qataris sit.
Talking about that rough neighbourhood, it seems to me that Israel's roughhousing them somewhat. More strikes today in Damascus in Syria. We have seen strikes taking place as well in Iraq, in various countries across the Gulf, where Israel seems to believe that there are Iranian proxies, militias, terrorist organisations hiding out. In terms of Israel's fight against what they perceive to be the sort of seven-front attack on their security, how are they getting along?
In terms of tactical victories and the ability to strike wherever they basically wish across the Middle East, there is no question which is a superior power. It's always going to be Israel. That's not really in question. They've got a very strong indigenous defence industry, a very strong, well-organised armed forces, and indeed they continue to have the support of the majority of the West, the majority of the time. Even the sanctions that we put in place, or the limited bans on some exports that we put in place, only affect a tiny percentage of what they're going to be able to do. And they've got the competence and capability to strike wherever they like. The real issue for Israel is that a long-term solution? What is the strategy towards some kind of peace and stability across the entire region? And I do not say it's not easy or difficult to create, because it really is hard for them. And you've got people who are looking for their mutual destruction. We have Hamas, who declared openly their genocidal approach to all Jews, and regardless, not just Israeli Jews. And so that's the difficulty they've got. But there has got to be a conversation somewhere around, well, how do we achieve peace and stability? Bits of it starts to happen. The Abraham Accords earlier on, before the October the 7th attack, where they were reaching out to various people across the region, got very, very close to be able to work with Saudi Arabia. That was all stymied as a result of the October the 7th attack. But the people, I think, are looking for some kind of peaceful solution across the board. Whether the so-called preferred two-state solution is viable any longer, I think is probably moot. But some kind of stability and peace across the region, I think, is called for. And that's the question which I think Israel has got to answer. How do we get to that place where our people are not having to run away from borders, where they have not got to spend billions on an Iron Dome, where they did not have to continue to strike it against their proxy enemies of Iran and other people around the region? And that's the conversation, which is a really hard conversation. And I think at the moment they haven't had that, or they're not willing to look at what some of those things might mean.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. One could say that it's very difficult to bomb an ideology, and a lot of what is going on here when it comes to Israel's security is ideology against the Jewish people, against, frankly, other religions as well, but they are the ones who have their own state in the region. And of course, the difficulty with sort of carrying out these attacks is some would argue that it concretizes acrimony towards Israel. And such acrimony we've seen from Ms. Helm. She's called Sarah Helm, I believe, who is the wife of our new national security advisor, the advisor to the government, Jonathan Powell. He was previously Downing Street Chief of Staff under Sir Tony Blair. He's due to take on the key role next month. Now, she has been, in the past, retweeting speeches made by Assad, where he's been saying some pretty hardcore things, describing Israel as not people in the civilized sense, but herds of settlers closer to barbarism than humanity, afflicted with schizophrenia between hating Nazism abstractly and loving it. And she's been retweeting this stuff, going, there he is, stepping up to the plate. Should we be alarmed that this is the wife of our new national security advisor?
Well, I can only speak very personally. I mean, my own family don't always agree with everything I say, often quite strongly. I suppose the issue really is not whether she thinks that, and I think those views are extreme views, and I've got my own views on Bashar al-Assad. But it really is, what does Jonathan Powell think? And I think that's where we need to get to. That's the conversation we need to have. We don't really have a process in this country the same way the Americans do, where some senior civil servant or officials are subject to public scrutiny, is what happens in America. But I think that's something I think that we need to know. We need to understand, what's he going to bring to the party? Hugely experienced, did a huge amount in terms of bringing about the Northern Ireland peace settlement. So, absolute kudos to him from there. And he's a good man to pick. But actually, what does he think? And what's he going to bring to the party, I think, is what I really like to focus on, rather than necessarily his agreements and disagreements with his wife.
Yeah, no, I think you're right, Ian. It's, I think, what we all deserve to know as well, because so much of what goes on now geopolitically actually comes down to ideology, particularly things in the Middle East. It's almost like the new Brexit, isn't it? Which side you're on. Colonel Simon Diggins, thank you ever so much. Fantastic catching up with you.